Blackwater Creek, Montana Territory, 1875. Dust from 100 hooves swirled golden in the afternoon light as Adam Lawson guided his horse away from the cattle drive, letting his second-in-command take the lead. At 25, he'd already made a name for himself as the youngest trail boss this side of the Missouri. The setting sun cast long shadows across his lean frame, highlighting a jawline that remained smooth despite 3 weeks on the trail. His eyes, the color of a summer sky, scanned the horizon with practiced ease. "Town's just ahead, boss," called one of his drovers. "Reckon we earned ourselves a night off." Adam nodded curtly. He'd learned early that sentiment was a luxury out west. His parents' deaths from fever when he was 16 had taught him that attachments were dangerous things. They gave life something to take from you. The trail was safer. The trail made sense. A man knew where he stood with cattle and cowboys, with the rhythm of hooves and the predictability of the seasons. 2 hours in town, he announced to his men, then back to camp. "We leave at first light." The men grumbled but knew better than to argue. Adam's cattle always arrived at market faster and healthier than any other outfits, and his men were paid accordingly. They respected him, even if they sometimes wondered what drove a man so young to be so serious. What they didn't know was how Adam's heart ached with an emptiness he couldn't name, a void that whiskey couldn't fill and that card games only made worse. He told himself it was better this way. The frontier was no place for softness. A man survived by keeping his distance, by never letting anyone close enough to matter. As they rode into Blackwater Creek, Adam noted the usual markers of a cattle town. The saloon with its tinny piano, the general store, the small church, and the sheriff's office. What he didn't expect was the commotion gathered outside that same sheriff's office, where a crowd had formed a loose semicircle around the wooden steps. "What's all this?" Adam asked a townswoman who stood on the periphery. "Sheriff caught himself that thieving girl again," she replied with a sniff. "Third time this month." Adam's curiosity got the better of him. He dismounted and handed his reins to one of his men. "I'll meet you all at the saloon." The crowd parted easily for him. A tall, well-dressed cowboy commanded a certain respect, even as a stranger. What he saw on those sheriff's office steps stopped him cold. A young woman stood defiantly beside the sheriff, her wrists bound in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 20, with hair the color of honey wheat cascading down her back despite the simple blue cotton dress she wore, faded but clean. Her chin was raised in stubborn dignity, though her eyes, green as spring grass, flashed with barely contained fury. "Stealing again, Miss Ryder," an older man called from the crowd. "When you gonna learn your kind ain't welcome here?" The young woman didn't flinch. "I paid for that bread fair and square, Mr. Jenkins. Just because you don't like where I come from doesn't make me a thief." "Your money's no good here," Jenkins spat. "Not when it comes from that place." The sheriff, a weathered man with a graying mustache, looked uncomfortable. "Miss Samantha, you know how folks feel. Maybe it's time you moved on from Blackwater." "This is my home," she replied, her voice steady despite the jeers from the crowd. "I was born here, same as any of you." Something in her defiance struck Adam like a physical blow. He'd seen proud men face down gun barrels with less courage than the slip of a woman showed to a town that clearly despised her. "What exactly is she accused of?" Adam found himself asking, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. All eyes turned to him. The sheriff straightened, recognizing the authority in Adam's tone. "This don't concern you, stranger," the sheriff said, though without much conviction. "I asked a simple question," Adam persisted. "What crime has she committed?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "Theft. Baker says she didn't pay for her bread." "I did pay," Samantha insisted. "Just because he forgot, taking my money doesn't make me a thief." Adam reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. "Would this cover the cost of the bread?" The baker, a portly man near the front of the crowd, looked startled. "Well, yes, but—" Adam tossed him the coin. "Consider it paid for. Is there anything else she's charged with?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "No, but Miss Ryder here knows she causes trouble just by showing her face in town." "Last I checked, existing isn't a crime in Montana Territory," Adam said coolly. "Unless the laws changed during my time on the trail." A dangerous silence fell over the crowd. Adam could feel dozens of eyes on him, measuring, judging. He didn't know why he was involving himself in this town's business. Something about the injustice of it all, perhaps, or the quiet dignity in the young woman's face. Whatever it was, he found himself unable to walk away. You must be new, an older woman said. You don't know who she is. I know I'm seeing a woman being harassed by a crowd, Adam replied evenly, and that doesn't sit right with me. The sheriff sighed heavily. Look, Mr. Lawson, Adam Lawson. Mr. Lawson, Samantha here was raised at Madame Loretta's place on the edge of town. Her mother was one of the working girls there. Adam understood immediately. The daughter of a prostitute, marked by her birth no matter what she did. The West was supposed to be a place where a person could reinvent themselves, but some stains, it seemed, couldn't be washed clean in the eyes of townsfolk. And that makes her guilty of theft. Adam asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The sheriff had the good grace to look embarrassed. No, and if you've paid for the bread. He turned to Samantha and untied her wrists. You're free to go, Miss Ryder. But please, for everyone's sake, try to stay out of town for a while. Samantha rubbed her wrists, her eyes finding Adam's for the first time. There was no gratitude there, only wariness and a flicker of something else, resentment perhaps at needing rescue. I don't need your charity, Cowboy, she said, just loud enough for him to hear. And I don't need another man thinking he owns a piece of me because he tossed a coin. Before Adam could respond, she had gathered her skirts and pushed through the dispersing crowd. He watched her go, struck by the straight line of her back, the proud tilt of her head. She didn't run, didn't hurry, she walked with the deliberate pace of someone who refused to be chased away. Adam found himself following her, not entirely sure why. Miss Ryder, he called when they'd cleared the main street. A moment, please. She stopped but didn't turn immediately. When she did, her face was composed, giving nothing away. I don't work at Loretta's if that's what you're after, she said flatly, and I don't owe you anything for back there. I never suggested either, Adam replied, surprised by the accusation. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Samantha studied him, clearly searching for deceit or hidden motives. Finding none, her shoulders relaxed slightly. I'm fine, this happens at least once a month. Usually, I just spend the night in jail and get released in the morning when they can't prove anything. That doesn't seem right. A bitter smile touched her lips. Not much is right in Blackwater, Mr. Lawson. But it's still home. You could leave, Adam suggested. Start fresh somewhere people don't know you. And prove them right that I don't belong, she shook her head. My mother lived her whole life in shame. I won't do the same. There was such conviction in her voice that Adam found himself momentarily speechless. Here was someone who faced daily scorn yet refused to bend to it. It was so different from his own approach to pain, to run, to keep moving, to never let roots grow deep enough to hurt when they were torn out. Where are you headed now? He asked. Home. I have a small cabin past Loretta's place. I work for her cooking and cleaning, she added quickly, seeing his expression. Nothing else. Adam nodded. May I walk with you? My men will be occupied at the saloon for a while, and I find I've lost my taste for celebrating. Suspicion flashed across her face again. Why? It was a fair question, and one Adam wasn't entirely sure he could answer. Because I'd like to know more about a woman who stands her ground when an entire town turns against her. Samantha laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. That's either the worst line I've ever heard, or you're the strangest cowboy to pass through Blackwater. Probably both, Adam admitted with a small smile of his own. She considered him for a long moment, then nodded. Fine, but stay on the path. People talk enough about me without adding a handsome trail boss to the rumors. They walked in silence for a time, leaving the town behind. The dirt path wound through scrubby pines before opening to a view of the valley below. In the distance, Adam could make out a small cabin set apart from a larger building he assumed was Madame Loretta's establishment. How long have you had your own place? He asked. 3 years. Saved every penny I earned from laundry and cooking until I could buy the materials. Some of Loretta's girls had customers who knew carpentry. They helped me build it. Impressive, Adam said, and meant it. Most men I know couldn't manage that. Most men you know probably weren't desperate to stop sleeping under the same roof where their mother worked. There was no self-pity in her voice, just statement of fact. Is your mother still? She died when I was 16. Consumption, Samantha's voice softened. She was beautiful once, everyone says so. Adam thought of his own parents, how quickly they'd been taken. I lost mine to fever when I was 16 too. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain. For a moment, the barriers between trail boss and outcast, between man and woman, between stranger and local seemed to thin. The moment was broken when a voice called out from the larger house ahead. Samantha. That you girl, a woman in her 50s stood on the porch, hands on her ample hips. She wore a fine dress, slightly outdated but well-maintained, with her graying hair piled atop her head. You're late, and who's that with you? It's me, Loretta, Samantha called back. Had some trouble in town, but this gentleman helped. They approached the house, and Adam tipped his hat politely to the madam. Up close he could see the remnants of a great beauty in Loretta's face, now lined with age and hard living. Adam Lawson, he introduced himself, just passing through with a cattle drive. Loretta's shrewd eyes assessed him. A cowboy with manners, that's rarer than gold dust. She turned to Samantha. You all right, child, what happened this time? The usual baker claiming I stole bread, mister. Lawson paid him off before the sheriff could throw me in jail for the night. Loretta's expression darkened. Those hypocrites, half the men in that town visit my girls after dark, then pretend they're too good for us in daylight. She looked at Adam with new respect. Thank you for helping her, most don't bother. It wasn't right what they were doing, Adam said simply. Well, rightness is in short supply around these parts, Loretta replied. Will you stay for supper? My cook makes a fine stew, and you've earned at least that much. Adam hesitated, looking to Samantha. Her face gave nothing away, but he sensed that his answer mattered to her. I'd be honored, he said finally, but I can't stay long. My men can manage without you for one evening, Loretta finished for him. Besides, the girls won't be receiving visitors for another hour. It's perfectly respectable. Adam doubted his men would agree with Loretta's definition of respectable, but he found himself nodding anyway. Thank you. Samantha's cabin stood about 50 yards from the main house, close enough for safety, far enough for privacy. It was small but solidly built, with a small garden plot beside it where late summer vegetables grew in neat rows. You've made something good here, Adam observed as they approached her door. It's not much, Samantha replied, but it's mine. No one can take it from me. The fierceness in her voice stirred something in Adam. How long had it been since he'd cared that deeply about anything? The cattle, the trail, they were work, not passion, not home. I'll fetch water for washing, she said, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Supper won't be for another hour. As she moved toward the well, Adam found himself wondering what it would be like to have a place that was truly his own. Not just a bedroll under the stars or a rented room in some trail town, but somewhere that held his history, his future. He wondered what it would be like to matter to someone the way this small cabin clearly mattered to Samantha Ryder. And for the first time in 9 years, the emptiness inside him felt like more than just a familiar companion. It felt like a wound that had never been allowed to heal. Supper at Madame Loretta's was unlike any meal Adam had experienced on the trail. The dining room was surprisingly elegant, with proper china and crystal glasses that caught the lamplight. 3 of Loretta's girls joined them, women in their 20s and 30s who, while dressed modestly for the meal, carried themselves with a confidence that spoke of their profession. What struck Adam most was how they treated Samantha, with genuine affection and protective care. They called her our Sammy and asked about her garden, her sewing projects, the book she was currently reading. They were, he realized with a start, the closest thing she had to family. Mr. Lawson here runs cattle up from Texas, Loretta was explaining to the table. Youngest trail boss I've ever heard of. Started young, Adam said, uncomfortable with the attention. Didn't have much choice after my parents died. Lot of that going around, said one of the women, a dark-haired beauty named Clara. Most of us ended up here because life didn't give us many options. Samantha, who had been quiet through most of the meal, spoke up. But some of us choose to stay, even when we could go. There was a pointed edge to her words that made Adam wonder if this was an old argument. Loretta certainly seemed to think so, as she sighed dramatically. Samantha believes Blackwater will eventually accept her if she just stays stubborn enough, Loretta explained. I keep telling her there are places where no one would care about her mother or where she was raised. And I keep telling you that running away solves nothing, Samantha countered. This is my home, why should I be the one to leave? The conviction in her voice stirred something in Adam. He'd been running for so long from his past, from attachment, from the very idea of belonging somewhere. Samantha's refusal to do the same both confused and fascinated him. Enough argument at the table, Loretta declared. Mr. Lawson, tell us about your adventures on the trail. Sammy loves stories about places she's never been. Adam found himself talking more than he had in months, describing the vast emptiness of West Texas, the treacherous river crossings, the nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch. Throughout his tales, he found his eyes drawn to Samantha, who listened with undisguised interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp mind and genuine curiosity about the world beyond Blackwater. By the time dessert was served, a surprisingly delicate apple tart, Adam realized he'd entirely forgotten about checking on his men. For the first time in years, he'd been fully present in a moment, not planning the next day's ride or calculating distances to water. "I should get back," he said reluctantly when the meal ended. "We leave at dawn." "I'll walk you to the path," Samantha offered, rising from the table. Outside, the night had grown cool, with 1,000 stars blazing overhead. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the fork where the path led back toward town. "Thank you," Samantha said suddenly, "not just for what you did in town, but for treating everyone at supper like regular folks." "They are regular folks," Adam replied, surprised. "Different circumstances, maybe, but not so different from anyone else." Samantha smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. In the moonlight, with her hair loose around her shoulders and that smile warming her features, she was breathtaking. "Will you be staying in Blackwater long?" she asked, and Adam thought he detected a note of something like hope in her voice. "Just tonight. The cattle need to reach the railroad in Helena by the end of the month." "Oh," she looked away, composing her features. "Well, safe travels then, Mr. Lawson." "Adam," he corrected gently. "My friends call me Adam." "Are we friends after just one day?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her tone. "I'd like to be," he answered honestly. Then, before he could think better of it, he added, "I'll be coming back this way in about 3 weeks after we deliver the herd. Perhaps I could stop in Blackwater again." The hope that flashed across her face was unmistakable, quickly hidden behind careful neutrality. "If you'd like, though there's not much to see in our little town." "I'd like to see your garden," Adam said. "Maybe by then your tomatoes will be ripe." Samantha laughed. "You want to come back to see my tomatoes?" "Among other things," Adam admitted with a small smile of his own. They stood for a moment in the starlight, neither quite willing to end the evening. Finally, Samantha took a small step back. "Good night, Adam Lawson. I hope the trail treats you kindly." "Good night, Samantha Ryder," he tipped his hat. "Thank you for an evening I won't soon forget." As he walked back toward town, Adam found himself fighting an unfamiliar urge to look back. Something about Samantha had gotten under his skin, her courage, her determination to carve out dignity in a place determined to deny it to her, the flashes of warmth beneath her cautious exterior. For the first time in 9 years, Adam wondered if the emptiness inside him might be filled with something other than the next cattle drive, the next horizon, the next temporary destination. It was a dangerous thought, and he pushed it away as he approached the saloon where his men were still celebrating. The frontier was no place for attachments. He'd learned that lesson well. But as he joined his drovers for a final drink, Adam found himself counting the days until the herd would be delivered and the return journey could begin. 3 weeks later, Adam rode alone into Blackwater Creek. His cattle had fetched a good price in Helena, his men were paid and dispersed to their various homes or further adventures, and he should have been headed straight to San Antonio to negotiate his next contract. Instead, he found himself drawn back to a small town he'd spent less than 24 hours in, thinking about a woman with honey-wheat hair and eyes that challenged him to see the world differently. The town looked much the same in the late September sunlight, the same dusty Main Street, the same buildings, the same rhythm of frontier life. A few people nodded to him in passing, not recognizing him from his brief visit or simply acknowledging another stranger passing through. Adam had brought his best horse, a handsome bay gelding, and wore a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers. He'd even splurged on a shave at a barber in Helena before setting out. These efforts made him feel foolish now. What did it matter how he looked for a brief social call before continuing south? Yet as he followed the now familiar path past town toward Loretta's establishment and the small cabin beyond, he found himself smoothing his shirt and adjusting his hat nervously. The sound of chopping drew him toward Samantha's cabin, where he found her splitting firewood with surprising efficiency. She wore a simple dress with the sleeves rolled up, her hair braided and pinned to keep it out of her way. Even in this mundane task, there was a grace to her movements, a determined precision that spoke of a woman accustomed to doing things for herself. She looked up at the sound of his horse, her expression shifting from wariness to surprise to a carefully contained pleasure that warmed something in Adam's chest. "You came back," she said, driving the axe into the chopping block and wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't think you would." "I said I would," Adam replied, dismounting. "And I wanted to see if those tomatoes ripened." A smile tugged at her lips. "They did, and I've put up nearly 20 jars of preserves from them." She gestured toward her garden, where the vines were heavy with fruit. "You have good timing, there's still plenty left." "Lucky me," Adam said, tying his horse to a nearby post, "though I suspect the company is better than the produce." A blush colored Samantha's cheeks. "Careful, Mr. Lawson. A girl might think you're sweet on her with talk like that." "Adam," he corrected gently, "and would that be so terrible?" The blush deepened, but her eyes held his steadily. "It might be unwise." Blackwater has a long memory and a fondness for making life difficult for those who don't follow its rules. "I've never been particularly concerned with other people's rules," Adam replied, "so I gathered." Samantha set aside the axe. "Would you like some coffee, or I could make tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful. Trail coffee is more grit than flavor." She led him into her cabin, a single room with a curtain dividing the sleeping area from the main living space. Despite its simplicity, the cabin was immaculately kept, with dried flowers hanging from the beams, carefully mended curtains at the windows, and a small bookshelf holding perhaps a dozen precious volumes. "It's not much," she said, echoing her words from his last visit as she moved to stoke the fire in the small stove. "It's perfect," Adam replied truthfully. There was more warmth in this small space than in any of the grand houses he'd visited in San Antonio or St. Louis. As Samantha prepared coffee, Adam noticed a small drawing pinned beside the stove, a childish rendering of two figures, one tall and one small, standing before what appeared to be this very cabin. "Did you draw that?" he asked. Samantha glanced at the picture. "No, that's from Lily, she's 7. Her mother works for Loretta. I watch her sometimes when things are busy at the main house." A shadow crossed her face. "She doesn't understand yet why people in town treat her differently. I try to keep her away from all that." "You're trying to give her what you didn't have," Adam observed softly. Samantha's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "I suppose I am." "Children shouldn't pay for the circumstances of their birth." She turned to face him fully. "Is that so strange?" "Not strange, remarkable." Adam moved closer, drawn by the intensity in her eyes. "You have every reason to be bitter, to hate this town, to leave and never look back. Instead, you stay and try to make things better for a child in the same situation." "What's the alternative?" "Become what they already think I am." Samantha shook her head. "I won't give them the satisfaction." They stood inches apart now, close enough that Adam could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the faint dusting of freckles across her nose, the way her lips parted slightly as she looked up at him. "I've thought about you," he admitted, his voice low, "every night on the trail back from Helena." "I've thought about you too," she whispered, "though I tried not to. Men like you don't come back for women like me." "Men like me. Men with options. Men who could have anyone anywhere." She looked down. "Men who don't need the complications that come with someone the whole town despises." Adam gently tilted her chin up with his finger. "What if I don't care what the town thinks? What if 3 weeks on the trail made me realize I'd rather be right here, complications and all, than anywhere else?" The hope that bloomed across her face was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Then I'd say you're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both," Adam admitted with a smile. The coffee pot began to whistle, breaking the moment between them. Samantha turned away to tend to it, but Adam could see the smile she was trying to hide, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured 2 cups. They spent the afternoon talking about everything and nothing, his adventures on the trail, her dreams of someday expanding her garden into a proper small farm, books they'd read, places he'd seen and she hoped to visit. He helped her finish splitting the firewood, and she showed him her preserves with undisguised pride. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Adam knew he should leave. Propriety demanded it. An unmarried woman alone with a man as evening approached would be scandalous even without Samantha's reputation to consider. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "But I'd like to call on you again tomorrow, if I may." "I'd like that," Samantha replied, walking with him to where his horse waited, "though people will talk." "Let them," Adam said with a conviction that surprised even himself. In just 2 meetings, this woman had made him question everything about the solitary life he'd built. The idea of riding away, of returning to the empty trail, suddenly seemed unbearable. "You're not just passing through anymore, are you?" Samantha asked perceptively. Adam looked at her standing in the golden light of sunset, brave and beautiful and utterly unique, and knew his life had irrevocably changed. "No," he answered honestly, "I don't believe I am." Over the next 2 weeks, Adam became a familiar sight in Blackwater. He rented a room at the town's small hotel, purchased supplies, and spent most of his days with Samantha. They rode together across the rolling hills surrounding the town, picnicked by the creek that gave the settlement its name, and spent evenings reading aloud from her small collection of books. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Whispers followed them whenever they walked through town together. Some were merely curious about the handsome stranger who'd chosen to stay. Others were openly hostile, muttering about Loretta's girl and how she was above herself to be keeping company with a respectable cattleman. Adam ignored them all. For the first time since his parents' deaths, he felt anchored to something real. The emptiness that had driven him from town to town, trail to trail, began to fill with simple moments. Samantha's laugh when he told stories of cattle drive mishaps, the concentration on her face as she tended her garden, the way her eyes lit up when he brought her a new book from the general store. On a crisp October evening, they sat together on the small bench outside her cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Samantha's head rested lightly against his shoulder, her hand entwined with his. "I received a wire today," Adam said after a comfortable silence. "From my partner in San Antonio. He's arranged another herd for a spring drive to Cheyenne." He felt Samantha stiffen slightly beside him. "When will you leave?" "I need to be in Texas by early February to help with the roundup." Adam turned to face her fully, "But I was thinking, what if I didn't go alone?" Samantha's eyes widened. "What are you saying, Adam?" "I'm saying that I love you, Samantha Ryder." The words came easily, as natural as breathing. "I'm saying that I don't want to leave you behind. I'm asking if you'd consider coming with me as my wife." For a moment she simply stared at him, her expression unreadable, then tears welled in her eyes. "You don't know what you're asking," she whispered. "Your business partners, your contacts, they wouldn't understand. A respectable cattleman married to a woman raised in a brothel, it would ruin you." "It would complete me," Adam countered, taking both her hands in his. "Samantha, before I met you, I was just moving from one place to the next, never staying, never connecting. I told myself it was because the frontier was no place for attachments, that caring for someone would only lead to loss." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "But you showed me what real courage looks like, not running from pain or hardship, but standing firm in who you are, building something meaningful despite what anyone thinks. I want that courage, I want a life with you." "Adam," she began, her voice trembling, "I've never left Blackwater. I don't know anything about cattle or trail life or—" "You know how to build something from nothing," he interrupted gently. "You know how to stand tall when others would break you. Everything else we can learn together." Samantha looked out across the valley toward the town that had never accepted her. "What about Lily and the other children? Who will protect them if I'm gone?" Adam considered this. It was so characteristic of Samantha to think of others first, to worry about those even more vulnerable than herself. "What if we didn't go to Texas permanently?" he suggested. "What if we built something here instead? There's good grazing land for sale north of town. I have enough saved to buy a decent spread. We could raise cattle, grow your garden into a proper farm." "Stay in Blackwater," Samantha looked startled by the idea. "But the people here—" "People can change," Adam said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. "And if they don't, we'll be independent enough that it won't matter. We'll create our own place where Lily and others like her are welcome." Hope bloomed across Samantha's face, quickly followed by caution. "You'd give up the trail life for me, for a permanent home in a town that might never accept us." "The trail was never my home, Samantha. It was just somewhere to exist while I convinced myself that belonging nowhere was safer than risking loss." Adam cupped her face gently. "You're my home now. Wherever you are, that's where I want to be." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "Then yes, Adam Lawson, yes, I'll marry you." Adam pulled her close, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. As he held her in the fading light, he knew there would be challenges ahead, the town's prejudice, the difficulties of starting a ranch, the adjustments they'd both need to make. But for the first time in years, the future seemed like a promise rather than a burden. When? Samantha asked after a long moment in his arms. As soon as possible, Adam replied. I'll speak to the minister tomorrow. Samantha tensed. Reverend Wallace has refused to let me set foot in the church since I was 16. Anger flashed through Adam quick and hot. Then we'll find someone else, or we'll go to Helena. I don't care where or how, Samantha. I just want you as my wife. She relaxed against him again. Loretta knows a judge in Bozeman who owes her a favor. He could marry us legally. Adam laughed. Of course she does. He pressed a kiss to Samantha's forehead. Then we'll go to Bozeman, and when we return, we'll begin our life together properly as husband and wife. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together planning their future, the land they would buy, the house they would build, the life they would create together. For the first time, Adam understood what had been missing all those years on the trail. Not just companionship, but purpose, something to build that would last beyond the next drive or the next season. In Samantha, he'd found not only the love he'd denied himself for so long, but also a vision of a life with roots, with meaning, with a legacy that might endure. The wedding in Bozeman was simple but dignified. The judge, a contemporary of Loretta's from her younger days in Helena, performed the ceremony in his chambers with Loretta serving as witness. Samantha wore a new dress of pale blue silk, Loretta's gift, and carried wildflowers Adam had gathered that morning. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both a promise and a defiance, a declaration that their love would not be diminished by the judgment of others. They returned to Blackwater the following day, driving a wagon Adam had purchased in Bozeman. Along with Samantha's few possessions from her cabin, they carried supplies for their new home: tools, seeds, household necessities, and a wedding gift from Loretta, a fine featherbed with linens and quilts. Adam had already arranged to purchase the Harlow property, 300 acres of good grazing land with a small but solid house and barn, just 4 miles north of town. Old man Harlow had been eager to sell and return east to his daughter's family, and the price was fair for land with a reliable creek running through it. As they approached Blackwater, Samantha grew quiet, her hands tightening on the reins she held. "What is it?" Adam asked, noticing her tension. "I'm not sure how to be Samantha Lawson," she admitted softly. "I've been fighting to be Samantha Ryder for so long, to prove I was worth something despite what everyone thought." Adam covered her hand with his. "You're still the same woman who built her own cabin and stood up to an entire town. The only difference is now you don't stand alone." She gave him a grateful smile, but it faded as they neared the town. "We need supplies from the general store." Adam understood her concern. This would be their first appearance in town as a married couple. "We go in together," he said firmly. Head high. The town was relatively quiet as they drove down the main street toward the general store. A few people stopped to stare at the sight of Samantha beside Adam on the wagon seat, her new wedding ring catching the sunlight. Whispers followed them, but Adam kept his gaze forward, his back straight. Inside the general store, the owner, Mr. Peterson, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up as they entered. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of them together. "Mr. Lawson," he greeted cautiously. His eyes flicked to Samantha, but he didn't acknowledge her. "What can I help you with today?" "My wife and I need supplies for our new home," Adam said clearly, emphasizing the word wife just enough to make it unmistakable. "We've bought the Harlow place." A loaded silence filled the store. Two women browsing fabric nearby stopped to listen, and a man by the tobacco counter turned to watch. "Your wife," Peterson repeated, his gaze moving between them. "Yes," Adam confirmed steadily. "Mrs. Samantha Lawson." Samantha stood tall beside him, her chin raised in that familiar defiant angle that had first captured Adam's attention. "We'll need flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and nails," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And I'd like to see what seed stock you have for spring planting." Peterson hesitated, clearly calculating the substantial order against his personal feelings. Business won out, of course. "Let me show you what we have." As they gathered their supplies, the whispers around them grew. By the time they loaded their purchases into the wagon, a small crowd had gathered on the boardwalk, watching openly. "That didn't take long," Samantha murmured as Adam helped her onto the wagon seat. "Let them stare," Adam replied, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "I'm proud to have you as my wife, and I don't care who knows it." As they drove away, Adam felt Samantha's hand slip into his. Thank you, she said softly, for what? For not being ashamed, for standing beside me. Adam brought her hand to his lips. Always, Samantha, always. The next weeks were filled with hard work as they established their new home. The house needed repairs, fences required mending, and Adam traveled to neighboring ranches to purchase his first small herd of cattle. Samantha threw herself into creating a home, cleaning, organizing, planning a spring garden larger than anything she'd managed at her small cabin. Word of their marriage spread quickly through the county. Some neighbors came to call out of genuine goodwill or curiosity. Others stayed away, clearly disapproving of Adam's choice of bride. The town itself remained divided. Some businesses welcomed their custom, while others found excuses to be unhelpful or unavailable. Through it all, Adam and Samantha presented a united front. Each slight, each whispered comment, each cold shoulder only strengthened their determination to build something meaningful together. One Sunday in early November, Adam suggested they attend church services in town. "Are you sure?" Samantha asked, clearly apprehensive. "Reverend Wallace made it very clear years ago that I wasn't welcome." "You're my wife now," Adam said firmly. "And if this is to be our home, we should be able to worship with our community." Samantha agreed reluctantly. She wore her best dress, the blue one from their wedding, and Adam his Sunday suit. They drove their wagon into town and tied it outside the small white church just as the morning bell was ringing. The congregation was already mostly assembled when they entered. A hush fell over the church as heads turned to watch them make their way down the aisle. Adam nodded politely to those he recognized, his hand firmly supporting Samantha's elbow. They had just seated themselves in an empty pew when Reverend Wallace approached, his thin face set in stern lines. "Mr. Lawson," he said in a low voice that nonetheless carried in the quiet church. "A word, please." Adam rose, standing protectively beside Samantha. "Yes, Reverend." "I think there may be some misunderstanding," the minister said, his eyes flicking nervously over the watching congregation. "Some members of our church family have expressed concerns about certain attendees." "My wife and I have come to worship," Adam replied evenly. "Is there a problem with that?" The Reverend cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson, you are of course welcome, but given Miss Ryder's background." "Mrs. Lawson," Adam corrected firmly. "And her background, as you put it, includes being born in this town, working honestly for her living, and harming no one. If those qualities exclude her from worship, then I must question what is being taught in this church." A murmur ran through the congregation. Reverend Wallace's face flushed. "Mr. Lawson, I must insist." "No, Reverend, I must insist," came a new voice. Mrs. Jenkins, the wife of the same man who had accused Samantha of theft months ago, stood from her pew. She was a formidable woman, influential in town affairs. "If we turn away a legally married woman who has committed no crime, we are not following the teachings of Christ." Stunned silence followed this pronouncement. Mrs. Jenkins made her way to where Adam and Samantha stood. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Lawson," she said, addressing Samantha directly. "I have judged you by circumstances beyond your control rather than by your own actions." "That was wrong of me," she turned to the Reverend, "and it would be wrong of this church to turn away anyone seeking spiritual guidance." The Reverend looked deeply uncomfortable, caught between his prejudice and the unexpected challenge from a respected parishioner. Finally, he nodded stiffly. "Of course, all are welcome in God's house." He returned to the pulpit, clearly flustered. Mrs. Jenkins took a seat beside Samantha. "I hope you'll forgive an old woman's stubborn foolishness," she said quietly. "Sometimes it takes a newcomer like your husband to help us see our own blindness." Samantha, too surprised to speak, simply nodded. Adam squeezed her hand reassuringly as the service began. Afterwards, several members of the congregation approached them, some out of genuine welcome, others from curiosity. Not everyone was friendly, several families left without speaking to them, and some whispers were still clearly disapproving. But a door had been opened. As they drove home, Samantha remained thoughtful. "Why do you think Mrs. Jenkins did that?" she finally asked. "She's never shown me anything but contempt before." Adam considered this. Perhaps seeing us married, seeing someone stand by you publicly, made her reconsider. Or maybe she's always had doubts about how you were treated, but lacked the courage to speak up until someone else did first. "Do you think things will change now?" "Not overnight," Adam admitted, "but it's a beginning." And we have time, Samantha. We're building something that will last. She leaned against his shoulder as they drove toward home, their home. I never thought I'd have this, she confessed. A husband, a home, the possibility of acceptance. I was prepared to spend my life fighting just to be tolerated. You deserve so much more than tolerance, Adam said, pulling her closer. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. Winter came early to Montana that year. By late November, snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the Lawson Ranch into a picture from a Christmas card. Adam and Samantha settled into the rhythm of ranch life, tending cattle, maintaining buildings against the harsh weather, planning improvements for the spring. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes just talking about their days. Adam had never known such contentment, such certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. One night in early December, as a snowstorm howled outside, Samantha set aside her mending and looked at him seriously. Adam, there's something I need to tell you. Something in her tone made him set down his book immediately. What is it? I'm with child, she said, her hands nervously clasping and unclasping in her lap. The baby will come in summer. Joy unlike anything Adam had ever known surged through him. He moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. A baby, we're going to have a baby. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Are you happy? Happy. Adam laughed, pulling her into his arms. Samantha, I'm overjoyed, our child, a little piece of both of us. She clung to him, her body trembling slightly. I was afraid, she confessed. My mother, she never wanted me to be born. She saw me as a burden, a mistake. Adam pulled back to look into her eyes. This child is already loved, Samantha, already wanted, and he or she will never doubt that for a moment. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me our child will never know the kind of rejection I did. I promise, Adam said solemnly. Our child will grow up knowing nothing but love and acceptance, both from us and from the community we're building around us. As they held each other before the fire, the howling wind outside seemed to underscore the sanctuary they'd created, a place of warmth and love in a harsh and often unforgiving land. The news of their expected child spread quickly through the small community. To Samantha's surprise, it seemed to accelerate the tentative acceptance that had begun with that Sunday at church. Women who had previously avoided her now stopped to offer advice on pregnancy and childbirth. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, began setting aside the freshest produce for Mrs. Lawson's condition. Even Reverend Wallace, upon hearing the news, sent a note offering prayers for mother and child. It's strange, Samantha remarked one evening as they returned from a visit to town. It's as if the baby makes me more human to them, more like everyone else. Perhaps it does, Adam suggested. A child represents the future continuation. It roots us here in people's minds. Samantha rested her hand on her still flat stomach. Or perhaps they simply needed time to see that their fears were unfounded, that our marriage didn't herald the collapse of decent society. That too, Adam agreed with a smile. Though I wouldn't have minded collapsing a bit of their decent society, if necessary. The winter passed in peaceful preparation. Adam expanded their herd with the purchase of 20 prime heifers from a ranch in Helena. Samantha corresponded with seed catalogs, planning an expanded garden and perhaps a small orchard. They converted the small room off the kitchen into a nursery, with Adam crafting a cradle from pine boards with careful, loving hands. As spring arrived, bringing new calves to their growing herd and the first green shoots in Samantha's garden, they received unexpected visitors. Lily and her mother, Clara, arrived at the ranch one sunny April afternoon. We've come to see how you're living, Clara explained, looking around the tidy yard with approval. Loretta said you'd built something special out here. Samantha, now showing her pregnancy, embraced them both warmly. I'm so glad you came, Lily, you've grown so much. The little girl beamed up at her. Mama says you're going to have a baby, can I feel it? Samantha guided Lily's small hand to her rounded belly just as the baby kicked. Lily's eyes widened in wonder. It moved. While Lily explored the ranch under Adam's watchful eye, Clara and Samantha talked quietly on the porch. Things are changing at Loretta's, Clara said, watching her daughter chase a butterfly near the garden. 3 girls have left for respectable marriages this year. Loretta's talking about converting part of the house into a proper hotel. Because of us, Samantha asked, surprised. Clara nodded. Partly, you showed it was possible to build a different life even when everyone said you couldn't. She hesitated. I've been saving, for Lily's future and maybe. Maybe mine too. What do you want to do? Samantha asked gently. I can cook, really cook, not just the simple meals I make at Loretta's. I've dreamed of opening a small cafe somewhere. Clara looked wistful. Somewhere Lily could be proud of me. Samantha took her friend's hand. You should do it, and you should do it here. Blackwater has no proper cafe, and with the new silver mine opening north of here, there will be more people coming through. You think it could work even with my past? If I've learned anything this year, Samantha said, looking out to where Adam was showing Lily a newborn calf, it's that the past only has the power we give it. People can change, communities can change. By the time Clara and Lily left that evening, plans were forming for a small cafe in town, with Samantha promising to help however she could. As Adam and Samantha stood waving goodbye, he slipped an arm around her waist. You've given them hope, he murmured, just like you gave me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. Samantha leaned into his embrace. We gave each other hope, and now we're giving it to others. She placed his hand over her belly where their child grew. This is what I always wanted, Adam, not just acceptance for myself, but to help build a place where no one is judged by where they came from, only by who they choose to be. We're building it, Adam assured her. Day by day, choice by choice. The summer of 1876 brought both challenges and blessings to the Lawson Ranch. A drought threatened their hay crop, and prices for beef dropped unexpectedly. But these concerns paled beside the anticipation of their child's arrival. On a sweltering July evening, after a day of difficult labor, Samantha gave birth to a daughter, small but strong, with wisps of honey-wheat hair and eyes that, when they occasionally opened, seemed as blue as her father's. She's perfect, Adam whispered, cradling the tiny bundle while Samantha rested. Absolutely perfect. What shall we name her? Samantha asked, exhausted but radiant. Adam considered the tiny face of his daughter. Hope, he said finally. Because that's what she represents for us for this place, Hope Lawson. Samantha smiled. Hope Elizabeth Lawson. Elizabeth was my mother's name. Despite everything, she did the best she could for me. Hope Elizabeth it is, Adam agreed, carefully placing the baby in her mother's arms. As Samantha gazed down at their daughter, tears slipped down her cheeks. I never imagined I could be this happy, she whispered, that I could have this much. Adam sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, his newborn daughter safe between them. You deserve every happiness, Samantha. You always have. News of Hope's birth spread quickly. To the Lawsons' surprise, a steady stream of visitors arrived over the following days, neighbors bearing gifts, townsfolk offering congratulations. Even Reverend Wallace came, bearing a small silver cup for the baby's christening. We would be honored if you would bring her to church for the ceremony, he told them, his previous coldness nowhere in evidence. The congregation would like to welcome the newest member of our community. When the day of Hope's christening arrived, the small church was filled to capacity. Loretta sat in the front pew, resplendent in a new dress ordered from Denver. Clara and Lily stood as godmothers. Mrs. Jenkins and her husband, formerly among Samantha's harshest critics, presented the baby with a handmade quilt. As Reverend Wallace pronounced the blessing over the peaceful infant, Adam looked around at the gathered faces, some familiar, some still new to him, all unified in this moment of community celebration. His gaze met Samantha's over their daughter's head, and the love he saw there filled the last empty places in his heart. This was what had been missing during all those years on the trail, not just love, but belonging. A place to stand firm, to build something lasting, to matter to others. Samantha had known it all along, had fought for it even when it seemed impossible. The frontier was indeed a harsh place, where survival often seemed the only goal worth pursuing. But Samantha had shown him that survival alone was not enough, that true courage meant opening yourself to connection, to community, to love, despite the risks. As they stood together before the congregation, their daughter secure in their embrace, Adam understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. The frontier wasn't just a place to test your strength against nature's challenges. It was a place to build something new, something better, a community where the past could be acknowledged but need not determine the future. When the service ended and they stepped out into the summer sunshine, the townsfolk followed, gathering around to admire the baby, to offer good wishes, to make plans for barn raisings and harvest celebrations, and all the shared efforts that bound a community together. Samantha slipped her hand into Adam's as they stood on the church steps, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her christening gown. "Look at this," she said softly, nodding toward the gathered townspeople. "This is what I stayed for. This is what I always believed was possible." Adam squeezed her hand, overwhelmed with gratitude for the woman who had changed not just his life, but an entire community through her quiet, unyielding courage. "You were right," he told her. "All along you were right." When the town had laughed, the cowboy had stood tall. His heart had belonged to the outcast, and together they had built something neither could have created alone: a home, a family, a community where belonging wasn't determined by your past but by the courage to create a better future. As they walked together toward their waiting wagon, hope nestled securely between them. Adam knew with absolute certainty that the emptiness that had driven him for so many years would never return. He had found his home, his purpose, his heart's true destination, and it had found him.